thank you for the wonderful opportunity. And I think what you guys are doing here is absolutely awesome. Saying that I come from Durban, often when all of our meetings, none of our customers are in Durban. They're all in Joburg, Cape Town, the rest of the continent and in the world. But we go to a meeting in Joburg, sit around a boardroom table, and they'll say, where are you from? And I'll say Durban. Or if I say I'm flying out, back to Cape Town, I'll say, no, I'm going to Durban. They're like, Durban? Like as if it's like very strange, like no good thing could come out of Nazareth, like, what are you talking about? You're a fintech business in Durban. And I was saying to one of the guys earlier, it started off as a bit of an organic thing because I was there and my family were there. And a lot of people start there and move. But it became intentional because in the world of technology, one of the skills in South Africa that we can't find enough of are software developers. And so while people can't find jobs, if you're a really good software developer, you don't have a problem. And if you have a software development business in Johannesburg or Cape Town, your turnaround on staff, people just get poached all the time. But in Durban, we don't have that turnaround. And so people come up here and we call it the export business. We train them at DUT. They all come up here for a career. And as they get married and have kids, they now want to go back where the grandparents are. And that's where we pick those staff up and then they come and work in our business. So good things do come out of Durban, I want to tell you. But I love that Trevor was talking about stories because I just felt just to start with a couple of stories and give you a bit of a background. And I didn't bring a presentation for two reasons. One, because I'm always busy, but two, because I wanted to really get the heartbeat of what was being spoken about here. I'd had a look into what you guys were doing, but just to pick up on some of the threads of what was going on, and I just feel there's such authenticity. I've been really moved, Gabby, especially by yourself and the work that you're doing, and I know Sheena in Durban and some of the other work, and I just think it's incredible. So I'll tell you a bit about my story to get a background, and then I'll come into the front part. The success of where we are now is that we've got a fintech business called FinFind, which is really an online platform that brings together the providers and seekers of small business finance. We don't describe it as microfinance because it's micro, small, very small, medium. It's any formal enterprise that's registered with SIPC, that's got a bank account, and that's doing business. How many of you know an entrepreneur who's looking for finance and can't find it? We all know someone, a whole lot of us in the audience. And the thing in South Africa, it's not that there's no money. In fact, lenders are not meeting their targets for deal flow and for signing business with SMEs. The problem is that the providers and the seekers can't find each other. And like everything, it's about linkage. So I'll tell you how we got to doing what we're doing now. We've had about 115 billion rands worth of requests through our site since October 2015. We were launched by the Minister of Small Business Development, and I'll come into the story of how we're working with government, with the JSE, and doing a whole lot of things. But just to start from the beginning, and the reason I do this is just to give courage to you in the audience or to the people that you represent in terms of your possibly congregations or your own businesses, that you don't have to be anyone to do amazing things. You just really have to get connected with what God wants to do, and I'll explain that. So, I was born actually in Zimbabwe, in Salisbury, Rhodesia, and I was brought to South Africa, to Durban, by my folks when I was really young. And my dad was one of 7 kids. Both his brothers were, you'll probably, if you're from Durban, will know them, they were hobos on the street. They wanted to be on the street, a lot of alcoholism and addiction, and just from, not easy background. A lot of, I see Louise smiling, she knows my Uncle Alan, who's now unfortunately gone to be with the Lord, but really, just there was nothing in my kind of childhood that would speak to anything to do with education. I was the first person in all of the cousins, out of all of those different siblings that had children, to matriculate. It was the big thing in our family that I got a matric. Everyone had left school long, they hadn't finished matric. People say, have you been to university? My parents thought university was for Americans, genuinely. In 1986, there wasn't a thought of, would we go to America, not even to America, but to university. It wasn't what would you study. It was, we were going, my mom was in the bank, and I went to be a bank teller. So I started in 1987 after matriculating, and I was saying to Ashley earlier, we were the last year in South Africa where we didn't have mixed races in school. 1986 matric, and then in Standard 6, 1987. And so everything was set up against me in terms of just, inbred racism and, all the things that would set you up for failure. And I started in the bank, and very quickly we were in the main branch in the bank, and in the head office, was the IT division upstairs. And so every time they would want to test a new system on the mainframe and see if it's working, they would look for someone who would stay behind and put in the big disk. And I was always game for anything. One thing I love, I'm curious, I love adventure, and so I would always stay. And because of that, I became the first woman in IT in 1988 in Durban. And by absolute luck and default. And I went through an IT career. I would go into ABSA, which was then Allied and became ABSA, go in and cable, solder cables and do things that weren't sort of normal. And I grew through that, and you get to a place in an IT career, anyone who's in technology, where you've got to decide, are you going to go the full technical route or are you going to go the management route? Because it's kind of, there's a divide. And I was just born with a natural leadership and a desire to organize people, and so that's the route I went. So Allied became ABSA. I left for a short time. We all did our stint in London for 2 years. I had an interesting story of working for the former prince and princess of the former Yugoslavia. Also another very interesting thing that happened. But I was a real homebody, a real like mommy's girl. I phoned home every day for 3 months. I was devastated to be in London. I came home as soon as I could. And I got another job in RT in Durban. I was promoted to Joburg into a kind of a JSE environment. Out of 52 weekends, I drove home 32 of them in my old Mazda that would stop and break down on the road. I'd pour water, and I just always landed up back home. But the point being is nothing special. I never studied. Much to, and let Ian and Ashley please close their ears, I'm not a reader. Readers are leaders. It's a problem for me because I don't have the attention span of a whole book, but I do snack. I consume a lot of data all the time, but I'm not the typical, people say, have you read this, have you read that? Every time someone wants to interview me, what are the 5 books, Thankfully, I've read the Bible, but besides, but the point is, nothing typical in the story that would be leading you into an environment where there was going to be something that I could do. And on the 29th of September, 1996, I had an encounter with the Lord. I won't go into it because I'm going to run out of time, and I've asked him to signal when I'm 15 minutes in case I haven't even got out the starting blocks for the actual story. But the point is that I had this, I never ever took leave because I didn't understand why you'd want to take leave. I always love what I do. And so when I had this encounter, it was at an NCMI, what they call a city celebration at the City Hall. I landed up looking at where I could go to church that night. I had this feeling I wanted to go to church out of the blue. Keep praying for your families, because just that day, out of the blue from nowhere, I had a desire to be in a church. I phoned my dad. I said, Dad, I want to go to church. It's lovely. There's some church here in Pinetown City. And I said, no, I'm going to be at work tonight. I always worked. And I worked in the center of the city. God always had me in the city. And they said, well, there's a city hall. They're having something there. And as I arrived, I saw my Uncle Alan. He was sober. Took me in, took me upstairs, and I had this amazing encounter. Dudley was preaching and Finney on the guitar, and I phoned my boss and I said, I'm not coming to work tomorrow, I want leave. And I took leave for a week, and I just was like so in love with the Lord, and I couldn't work out what this whole thing was that was happening to me. When you had that encounter, I was completely rewired. I was helping people with abortions, all kinds of things before that. I had someone phone me shortly after that. I said, no, I can't help you. It's not right to have an abortion. And they said, why? I said, I have no idea. But what I can tell you, and the point of this is, God said he writes his word on your heart. I hadn't read the Bible, but I knew that was wrong. And I slowly had to start getting into Paul Rory. I arrived in his church, Jesus freak T-shirt, the very difficult, sort of very ambitious, and it was a very interesting season. But the point is this, that I went back after a week, my boss phoned me, because I said, could I have another week? He said, Darlene, is everything okay? Are you coming back? I said, no, I am, and I went back, but I used to smoke like 60 cigarettes a day, but I'd have a cigarette in the ashtray. Those days you could smoke in your office and in the airplane. And I'd have one in my ashtray, and then I would light one and go and talk to my staff and come back, and now I've got 2, and that's how I was. I just gave up smoking, woof, like that, overnight. I weighed 100 kilos, I lost 40 kilos. These radical things just happened to me because all of my appetites and everything just started to change. But at work, we had this whole, what could I call it, a revival break out. Because I started impacting people, but the people I impacted landed up being like our tea staff, and they started to see the difference in me. And the long story short, I landed up running a home group in a township for 7 years, and I was saying to Ashley earlier, I'm the most unlikely person to be in a township that you'll ever meet. But God does what He wants to do with us. And I started realizing later that part of the journey He took me on was preparing me for some of the stuff that He's got me in now. After 7 years of running a home group there, I got a scripture out of Acts to say, go and wait in the city. Now, I lived in the city. I had a flat that overlooked the whole city, and I had a dining room table with a bay window, and I used to like stand and declare and sing over. I felt like the orchestra of the city, like it was this amazing thing. And I felt God say, go and wait in the city. I thought, well, Glenridge is in the city. I'm living in the city. So I just said, look, I can't be in this other home group. I need to be in the city. And right at that time, that whole exodus started to happen out of Zimbabwe with all the difficulty that was happening. And we had a feeding scheme on the streets in the city, and all of a sudden, these Zimbabweans started to arrive. And we started to realize they had skills, and we were linking them up with skills. There's a whole story to do with that. We started a job linkage platform that Mr. Price landed up taking and running for their 10,000 cashier program across the country. There's a whole lot of stories peppered into it. But what happened is, when I'd meet these guys on the street, we'd go down, we had these big pots of samp, and I always said we must feed people before we preach the gospel, because we didn't want to peddle the gospel. You didn't have to wait, hear the gospel and wait for your food. And as we started to speak to guys, I would say, I come back to say, Raw, where are these guys going to go to home group? Because they live on the streets. They don't live in Musgrave and Durban North. How are we ever going to get them there? So can't we start a home group in Glenridge? And so we did that. On a Tuesday night, we'd open up, and we had a home group of 150 home, but the guys that we knew well, we had in jobs, etc. There's a whole story there. But you know what they would do? The first thing they would run in on a Tuesday night, they'd go and plug in their cell phone. Because the only way someone could get a hold of them for a job was if they could contact them on their phone. But in those days, it cost R5 to plug your phone in on the street to get it charged, and you had to sit with your phone, so you couldn't work during that time. And what started to happen, I started to realize the real issues of people trying to find jobs, etc. So just to back up a little bit, I was working in the corporate, but now I was literally, listen guys, this is no joke, I was hiding in the toilet. We had this, you had to read the Bible. It was like, I don't know if anyone knows Cedric Van Dane, but I was very scared of him. And he had a program where you were reading the Bible in it was like 39 weeks or 27 days or some ridiculous thing. And you had to finish Nehemiah that week. And I used to hide in the toilet and make sure, because I wanted to, I'm very OCD. Like, if I said I had read Nehemiah, I had read every word of Nehemiah. And within that very short space of time, we read the Bible, which also revolutionized me. But I started to realize I was lacking integrity in my workplace because I didn't want to work there. I got this thing up, what is this place I'm working in? It's this big corporate, and they're making all this money. Who are they making it for, and what are we doing? I got this thing in my heart about impact. I didn't even know where it came from. And so I thought, I need to become a humanitarian, because that's who's going to change the world. God's going to help. I'm going to be a humanitarian. So I resigned, and I went with a couple who are just awesome, close mates of mine, Doug and Sheena, up to Malawi. And any of you guys that know Anton here, his wife now, Ange, and she lived in a flat with me before they got married. She got married out of my flat into theirs, so there's a whole lot of threads there. But anyway, I resigned and I went up to Malawi for 6 weeks. And I decided money is evil. I need to be a humanitarian. I'm going to help the poor. And I came back and I got a job in a HIV prevention program that Glenridge was running at the time, well, they still are, called Itembeletu. And my job was to work with the parents of the children in the school program to help them and find out what their problem was. And of course, their problem was no job. Most of the indignities and the difficulties that actually come out of the world are actually because men and women aren't working. And so there's a lack of dignity for fathers. There's all kinds of abuses, and a lot of the social and the breakdown, social fabric stuff comes from, work was before the fall. God put us to work, and then the fall happened. Work is something that is good for us. It gives us dignity. So they said to me, we want to make you the economic development coordinator. I said, don't you have to go to university for that? I'm not quite even sure what that is. And they said, Darlene, we just want you to get in the community and start working. Very quick story. What happened was they had a warehouse that they were given by government at no cost so that they could start programs in there, like to help with jobs. And everyone was doing a beadwork program. I said to him, why were they doing that? Because all the women knew how to do beads. I said, the problem is, when last did any of you buy a beadwork here? There's not a market, it's saturated. We need to find what actually people need and teach people to make what's needed so that you have a pull market opportunity, and then now they can continue to work. Because when the bead program was done, now all those women were more disappointed because now they had been through the thing and they couldn't get any sales. And so I said, look, we got this warehouse here. At church, there's a guy who's he's got a project to build a boat, to build a yacht, a 2 million rand yacht. So his problem is he needs premises. So I'm going to say to him, why don't you come and take this premises? We won't charge you rent, so it'll drive down your overhead. And for every, and we'll take some of your staff cost in terms of what we're doing. But for every person experience that you've got a fiberglass or whatever it is, you have to take one of my parents in the program and teach them to do what you're doing. And so we ran this program, and we had a 200 square meter. We had to eventually bash the wall out because we couldn't get the boats out. We moved to a 2,000 square meter thing. But the point was, government then came and said, we want to study this model that you're following. What model are you following? I was like, no, I'm just following logic. There's no model. The model is we've got a premises that we get for no rent, and this guy's looking for a premises. And if we can drive down his overheads, he's going to train our staff so we don't have to pay him. And what started to dawn on me were these thoughts I was having were not, I thought they were very normal and logical and not, but I realized nobody else was having them. And it's a combination of gifting and logic and pragmatism, but ultimately it became a model that then happened. And what happened now was that in that NGO, they had no systems. So you're working with a whole bunch of kids and parents, and so the overseas funder wants to know how many parents who have got these many children who are on a grant who are not HIV positive. Everyone's scratching through paper, Excel spreadsheets. So I said, look, guys, why don't we just get someone to build us a little database? Now, I just happened to, my roommate at the time wasn't Ange, it was another friend, Annaline, and she did little access databases. So I said, Annaline, listen, can you build this thing? And she did. And the professor at the time looked at this, and we got this problem at the medical school with KZN University, where we're doing an HIV vaccine project. And it's too big for Excel, and it's too small for a lab system. Can you come and look? Genuine, we go in there like really two blondes. She's also blonde in there. And we negotiate this thing where we build this system that starts running KZN's HIV vaccine work. A visiting professor from Harvard arrives. He looks at this thing. He says, who developed this thing? They call us, and he said, will you come to Harvard and develop this? We're running this HIV vaccine project. And Lee and I are looking at each other like it's not April 1st. I mean, it's genuinely exactly how it happened. We were flown, I then met with Anneke Tsoudas, and I said, look, we want to start a business. There's a gap in the market. If Americans need us two South Africans over there's a gap. We're going to start a business. We called it the Development House. We made these little business cards. They were pink. It was incredibly cheesy. And the two of us flew over there, and we built a system for Harvard. And these were the kinds of things, just by the availability and just things that God was starting to do. So long story short, the Development House was the custom software development house that I started. I was saying also to Ashley earlier, I'm known as a fintech entrepreneur. Fin stands for finance. The other thing that separated at birth beside direction with me was financial management. I'm not good at it at all. Tech is the actual technology. Now, I've been managing tech environments, but I couldn't write a line of code if all of our lives depended on it. Not every business has to be, often the technical person in the business is the wrong person to drive it. Every tech business needs a hacker and a hustler. If you've got a hacker and he's building good systems, then you can't hustle to get it to the market. You don't have a business. Because actually, it's that hustle and the breaking, and that is the thing that God had put in me, was to be able to break open opportunities. It's not all a good story. I liquidated 3 times in the Development House. The first time I went down 150,000. The next time I went down 1.2 million. I started a project government was going to fund, got a whole bunch of developers. I had to reach a milestone before I got the first payment of 1.2 million, so I borrowed and I did whatever I could. I used VAT as my overdraft facility. I did whatever I could to get us there, and we never actually got to the first milestone because we actually made it so complicated that it was just too out of our reach. So my staff worked with me for a few months, even unpaid. Eventually they said, Dal, look, we're out of here, and I was left with the debt. I lost my house, my car, They came, took all my furniture out my flat, that same flat that I was, and my friends from the corporate were like, we told you. I said, you know what? I'm working with a group of people on the streets every Tuesday and on a Sunday, and when I drop them off, now in a borrowed car, I'm dropping them on different safe places in the streets where they can sleep, and the cement is their pillow. I'm coming home to a flat. It may have no furniture in, but it's carpeted. And what happened is my perspective was so much different to theirs. I felt privileged. They felt, oh my word, the world is falling in. And these were so after liquidating, we're going down 1.2 million, I started having a look at why am I failing? And the very reason I was failing is because I didn't understand financial management. I asked them to tell me at 15 minutes, so I just still had some time. I didn't understand financial management. Now, if you run, any of you or you know people that run a business, you can be very good at the service or the product that you are actually selling or making. You can build most business programs in this country, government or private sector run, focus on the front end of the business, marketing, sales, etc., etc. But very few of them are focusing on the back end or the financial management side. And I always say to entrepreneurs, sales will bring in the business, but only good, sound record keeping will keep you in business. I liken it like a cooking program. You know, they have a cooking program and the person standing there and they've got their hat on and the apron. They've got all the stuff that's already been put there and they're now telling you how to cook. That's what business is like. It looks good. But mostly when they turn around in this country in a business to put the thing in the oven, butt naked. The back end of the business, the finances are just... I started working with young entrepreneurs and saying, how's your business? It's great, got this tender, the shoes are shining. As soon as I got to know them a bit better, I'd say, listen, what are you doing with your finances? And you know what was amazing? Every one of them wanted good financial management. There's this perception that, entrepreneurs are just like cowboys. Now, everyone wanted to run a good business, but nobody was equipping them to do that. And so most that have what they call checkers packets with slips. They would keep slips from their barber, if it had to do with their business, they didn't understand personally, and the business are two different legal entities. All these things are unnecessary. And I thought to myself, that's the thing that we need to fix in this country. So liquidated, down 1.2 million, looking up from a very dark hole. I went back to my parents in my mid-30s, so at least I had a meal. And I thought, I'm going to solve this problem. So I started working with an accountant, a friend at Glenridge, and I said, the problem with financial systems for entrepreneurs is they speak Accountanese. I still don't know if the debtor owes me or I owe the debtor. I don't know that. I know who the customer is and who the supplier is. You'll say to an entrepreneur, do you have a loan account? I don't take loans. No, but do you ever put your own money in the business? Yeah, every month. The accountants call that. I said, no, we call that owner's money because it's our own money. So I said, well, why don't we develop a system that people can understand? So we developed this thing, which basically, let's say we were at a business lunch and I decided I was taking you all to lunch and the bill came, but I never had my business credit card with me. I had my personal card and I paid for the lunch. This was now a business lunch that I've paid for myself. How would a normal entrepreneur account for that transaction? Well, we just go in, there's a screen, it says finances, the tab, and it's got a button that says owner's money, and you click it and it says, what's the date? Oh, I did it today. What did you do? And what was it for? So a little drop-down comes with what accountants call a chart of accounts, which normally has things that you don't know what they mean. Cost of sales, no idea. No, we just have normal things. Client lunch, cell phone, whatever, salaries. And you click that, and the whole VAT is a proper system. And in the back end, while you're doing that, it does the debit and credit to do this journal and trial balance and GL. So it's a simple single entry system that the system does a double entry in the back end to produce the financials. We went on to win a national and a global innovation award. I found out to my great surprise that accounting is the same all over the world. I didn't even know that. I thought I was developing this, possibly for Durban. And no. But the point is this. I'm not saying we must all run into things ignorantly. I'm not saying we mustn't be educated. But the point is this, that innovation has everything to do with problem solving. Very little to do with large brainstorming sessions. Any stone in the shoe problem that you have, even if you don't know, can you imagine me creating an accounting system? And I'm very honest with the world. In business, wherever I go, I don't try and make out like I understand, because that is that's the irony of it. If I can understand it, the entrepreneur can understand it, and that's how. So we've raised 25 million in venture capital for SMEZ. We have, it's a cloud-based system now. MTN has white labeled it to take it up into Africa, and that was the one story. They've now shown me 5 minutes, so I'm going to just skid along very quickly. What then happened along the route is I found USAID were doing a big study in this country on the systemic challenges to access to finance. Why is this problem? And they came up after spending $30 million and 5 years. They could have had one meeting with a few of us. We could have explained what the problem was. But what they came up with, they said this: there's 3 problems. 1, providers and seekers of finance can't find each other. Cost a lot of money for a bank to find a customer they can actually fund, so a high search cost. High search cost for the entrepreneur. He only knows about the banks who's not going to give him money anyway. But there are 250 funders in this country for SMEs and over 500 products, grant, equity, and loan products. So you're never going to know them all in your head. It must be a system that can. So entrepreneurs come into FinFind now and they say, I'm a black woman-owned business in Gauteng and construction, turning over 5 million. I need 100,000 working capital. And as they're telling us who they are, we are filtering out through algorithms the funds that don't match them and only leave the 3 in this country that they can work with. So they immediately, and they do that for free. We give it to the entrepreneur for free. People were working out this business model. We must charge the entrepreneur. So I said, look here, if you don't have carrots at home and you go to the vegetable shop to buy carrots, you put them in your trolley and you arrive at the counter and the cashier says that'll be 3 carrots. You'd say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. I don't have carrots. People don't have access to finance. They're trying to get finance. Now you want to charge them. They must use the system. We must charge the lender, because the lender now is getting a lead directly that matches him. He doesn't have to pay marketing fees or assessment fees. So we are sucking up costs they've already budgeted for. And that's our model. We get 1.5% commission on every loan that originated out of a FinFind lead. So that was the first problem. USAID said they can't find each other. When they do find each other and they match, the business now doesn't have financial statements and management accounts and the information that a lender needs to look into a business to see if they're bankable and they can afford the finance. And who did they find? SMEZ. They said, oh, you're the only business we've seen in South Africa who actually entrepreneurs can use. There are some other amazing accounting systems, and I don't bash other systems. One of them is the South African system, but they are for higher up in the pyramid, for people that can already afford bookkeepers and accountants. And people say to me, you know, they give that out for free. That's software to entrepreneurs. I said, you know, let me explain something. If this was a restaurant full of people here, you were all very hungry, and the kitchen had food, and no one was eating, it's because they're serving pork and everyone's Jewish. That's the problem if there's a system, they can give it to you for free. If you don't know who the debtor is or what a loan account is, and you can't afford a bookkeeper, you're actually locked out of being able to use that system. So USAID partnered with us, and long story short, they landed up giving us this concept called FinFind. And through a bid, and we ring-fenced it into its own entity. We've raised about 15 million in venture capital. We partnered with government, and I wanted to chat a bit about government, business, and civil society. The thing government was bringing us was reach. Government has reach into the base of the pyramid. They've got CEDA, all kinds of things that maybe not working well, but they can get a message out. And the most expensive part of developing a software system is actually getting it to market. It's cheap to develop. People think they're like, oh, it's been so hard, we've developed the software. I'm like, oh, the hard part's starting. To get it to market. So that's the one thing, reach. So we partnered with government for reach, so it took away all of my marketing costs, started to get that reach, and now we've just partnered with the JSE. They're white labeling FinFind as their listing platform for the JSE, because it's got all the components that are for local. So it works down to the base and up to someone, a medium-sized enterprise that wants to list. There's a lot of stories to tell you in between that, but my heart in speaking to you was basically to say, I want to tell you about one last project and then I'll finish. That there's a great privilege of God putting us in this country, and like somebody said earlier, saying we're born at this, and God has specifically placed us. Where there are problems, creates opportunity. The worst place to be is in a country where there's no problems. I mean, ultimately, every problem that you face, and someone, as someone was passing the mic around earlier for your questions, somebody over here said, but what are we going to do? I just want to say, how do they say, how will we do it? I said, you must just do it. Innovation, you're innovating because it hasn't been done before. And however you've seen it done and hasn't worked, well, that's at least something that you mustn't do. You've got to start. But I was not equipped to do these things. And all what God wants is availability. A lot of working with the poor and a lot of these things are very linked with inconvenience. And a gospel that's often preached nowadays is a gospel of comfort and a gospel of safety, which is part of the gospel. But the good news is jobs for the poor. It's reform, not relief in the form of grants. And to reforms, you've got to give people jobs. So I'll tell you the last job project that we're doing right now, and then I'll close. There's just been a big job summit. I don't know how many of you heard about it. President Ramaphosa announced a job summit. He wanted to get all big business and people involved on the stage to come and commit certain amount of money for reinvestment back into the country. And they did calls for proposal for genuine new job creation projects. Not very often in this country we have what's called jobs recycling. A small business liquidates. They first lose all their high skilled, their highly skilled people because you can't pay them. You get left with people that are unskilled. Eventually you fold. And then when you're able to actually re-engineer yourself, you go back and you employ those same people if you can get them. But there's not a lot of really good expansion stuff happening. So that's why very often they're wanting to fund these high potential projects where this business can employ 200 people. But there's a lot of businesses out there that need to be funded that are just survivalist or 1 or 2 man businesses. So we said the two biggest problems in this country, unemployment on the one hand, youth unemployment. On the other side, small businesses who could have funding, but they don't have financial statements. So we propose we have to do it through NEDLAC. I don't know if anyone knows what NEDLAC is. It's the hardest thing to pitch to. It's a forum of business, government, labor, and community. So they don't want to agree on anything before you get there, but on principle. Now you've got to present a proposal that they've all got to agree on if it's going to go forward. And through that eye of a needle, this proposal that we put down, we said we want to take unemployed anyone, don't have to be graduates. If they're graduates, they don't have to be accounting students. Within a month, we can train them on how to capture the books because 80% of bookkeeping is just filing. And so we want to teach them, we're going to partner them, because in FinFind we can see in this particular area, here are 1,000 businesses that match with Nedbank, here with CIFA, this one with X. We know we're working with the banks who've got their funds set aside for black-owned businesses. We want to train these 100 unemployed people, send them into specific businesses that we know match for funding but can't get there because of their financial statements. Let them do SMEs to get the financial statements, work with accountants to sign those financial statements off, work with the lender to give that money, and then that one intern works with 3 businesses. So it's a 1:3 for a year. After the funding's there, that intern's still there to do post-loan monitoring, to make sure the management accounts are still being done and the repayments are happening. What happens after that year? Those 3 businesses say, please will you still help us with our books? Who's going to help us now? And he starts finding other people. So he has a natural job. He can start his own bookkeeping business. He can work for one of those businesses. And so this is the project that we proposed. We were accepted as a Presidential Job Summit project. It's afforded us amazing opportunities of being on stage with all kinds of big government, big business. But ultimately, this thing about big business and government, I was saying to Ian earlier, government and business want to work together. They just actually don't know how to do that, because there's so much politics in each of them and they don't understand each other's engagement strategies. And all you need is 1 or 2 hustlers to come in there and actually join dots. And they're on the way here. I phoned a senior person in government. There's an opportunity. It happened through the EU. Can we just have an informal meeting? You informally set something up, pilot a few things, and then it starts to give life to it. So essentially, I'm going to end it there, but just to say that there are amazing opportunities for you all doing amazing things, people that you know of to do amazing things. And ultimately, all we've got to do is tell people that they can just believe in the thing that God's put in their heart. And my one big thing I stand on, stick to your superpower. My superpower is breaking open new markets, is essentially, the nicest way you can describe a hustler without it sounding bad. That is what I am. I partner and I employ for my weaknesses. I don't believe in working on my weakness. You work on your character weaknesses, but your personality, the way that God has temperamentally predisposed you, how He's gifted you, that's just straight from Him. If you are gifted to produce wealth, it's got nothing to do with how clever you are. You could have been gifted with a mercy gift. It's just by His design. And if we stick to our gifts and we all partner together, we really can change this country. And that's what I tell government and business. I'm only doing this because I really believe that we can change the country. Otherwise, I wouldn't do this. So, yeah, that's really, I've got lots more to say, but I think just to end it there, thank you so much.
Thank you, Darlene. That was wonderful.